So tonight we're having three short personal talks, and that's always my favourite type of talk that we have here. I love the night, so we have the three short talks. And I think tonight we're really in for something very special. What I'm going to do is just say a little, we'll just introduce the names of the people who are going to give the talks, and then they're going to come up one after each other. While they're giving the talks, they're going to be timed. They've got a certain amount of time, and Jenny's going to wave the peacock feather to give them a warning. They don't need to stop then, but that's when they need to start coming to an end. This is just a reminder to them. But it's just really generous of all three people who are giving talks, because actually, coincidentally, all three of them are very busy people. They have families and jobs and lots of responsibilities. And I think most of them have just been away on holiday as well, including Amalasiddhi, yes. And it's a bit like they've agreed to do the talk, even though I think it might have been a little bit of a bit of pressure on them to do it, so it's really generous. They're going to be talking about their favourite verse or verses from the Bodhicaryavatara. So you'll remember that this series is looking at the Bodhicaryavatara, this amazing guidebook on how to become a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva, a being who wants enlightenment for all beings. An incredibly beautiful idea. And the Bodhicaryavatara, at times quite a hard-hitting sort of book with some really interesting ideas. And when I've asked people to do short talks, I usually just leave it up to them completely what they choose, and that's usually never resulted in people choosing the same verses. But I think today it might have, but that is completely fine, because I'm sure they will have a different take on those verses. And as Prajnasri said earlier, there's something about, there's reasons why we like particular verses. Often they speak to most people, so they're good to hear about again. So the order of the talks is going to be, first of all, Peter Wells, great. Then we're going to have Prajnasri, and then we're going to finish with Amalasiddhi. Okay, so I'll ask Peter to come up.
So thanks everybody. Thanks particularly Satyajyoti for asking me, because I kind of really feel lots of feelings when Satyajyoti asked me. One was anxiety, there's still a little bit of that feeling. Another was joy, actually. It's just really like, oh wow, this is an amazing opportunity. I really love this material. And I thought it was just a great opportunity to sort of share some of that and to reflect a little bit more on that. In Vidanya's version of the text, or the condensed version of the text which Vidanya's prepared, kind of going through this and thinking, oh, so many verses I really want to choose. I really want to choose that, I'll choose that. You know, so that every line is really valuable. It's really valuable teaching. It's really accessible. I was just filled with joy, actually, just reading the material, and just, also feeling quite, you know, how great is Shantideva. Anyway, to get to the point, the section, the verse I've chosen is, it might be familiar to some of you who were here last week, because Satyajyoti touched on it last week, and it's the start of the section on ksanti. So the benefits of ksanti and the harmfulness of its opposite. So the verse I've chosen is actually the first one, and it goes like this: ill will and resentment destroy all the benefits of spiritual practice. Ill will is the most destructive state, and ksanti is the best ascetic practice. So we should develop ksanti in every way we can and with all the effort we can muster. Okay? And the first, I'm going to repeat the first line, I'm not going to repeat the whole lot, but the first line is, ill will and resentment destroy all the benefits of spiritual practice. So that's right. There's no wiggle room. That's what I think. There's got to be wiggle room. Surely I'm allowed a little bit. No, not at all. So I was feeling a little bit in trouble with that. So I think this was touched on last week. So we understand ksanti as patience or forbearance, or in some ways patient forbearance. So Shantideva instructs us to look at three things. The first is around kind of ksanti, or patience towards the endurance of suffering, our central teaching. Here, the second one is as a result of ksanti towards as a result of reflection on suffering and the conditions of reflection, to reflect on that teaching, those teachings of suffering. And thirdly, to bring ksanti to the endurance of the injuries from others. So again, really, really pointed stuff. And I'm just going to slip in another verse, which is a bit naughty, because I was asking you to do one verse. But my second verse is, we should treasure someone who gives us the opportunity to practice patience. Okay? Because they help us along the path to awakening. We need to think about people who really help our practice. We need to be forbearance too. So I've got two examples, and I'll see what you think of these. There were lots of opportunities to practice ksanti, and Tim Sanghapanti last night was reflecting on the kind of the little eddies of suffering we experience. He talked about little eddies. And I was thinking about this, and these may be really small things. So for instance, one I regularly have is, why hasn't my daughter Tilly cleared the table when I've asked her 3 times to do that? So perhaps on the first time I find myself, very much in love mode. Oh, Tilly, please do this, please do that. And the third time, do I find myself slipping into the power mode? Am I starting to tell her to do it? Maybe I am. So again, it's sort of teaching there. So that's kind of the little eddies of like everyday life, little kind of things we're not so happy with. But then some really, really big crises, aren't there? And so these might be along the lines of, why is Boris Johnson Prime Minister? Why can't everyone see the stupidity of burning the Amazon? That sort of suffering. Why are the people doing that? So, in the tone-honoured tradition, I also Googled ksanti as a kind of preparing the talk on Free Buddhist Audio, and I noticed that 3 of the talks of the top 5 are by people with connections to Sheffield. So there's Satyajyoti's last week, essentially on ksanti. There's Vajratara, which was a response to world events just after the referendum on Brexit, how we should develop a sense of compassion, and also Kay Mashuri's talk. So 3 of the 5 have actually been given by people from Sheffield. So that's going to get up to 5 out of 7 tonight. So those sort of teachings. So Shantideva's tells us to treasure these small eddies and these big crises, and to reflect on those, and to develop a sort of practice of patient forbearance. So the question I had was then, how can Boris Johnson help my spiritual practice? So I really, really struggled with it. And I kind of think this is really, really rich. I think it's sort of a vein for many of us of kind of like, politically active, socially aware, kind of wanting change. And I remember being really, sort of righteous indignation through my teens and 20s, either in protest or even just sort of things like shouting at the television when there was someone on there I didn't like who was a politician. I was thinking, what such a waste of energy. But I kind of didn't know that then, although I probably had a glint of that. So bringing Shantideva to bear and the practice of ksanti has really helped by kind of sort of teaching from a teaching recently, which was kind of the difference between anger and ill will. So ill will is kind of wishing someone harm, but the anger, the emotion of anger, is something that we can work with and transform, and we can see it arising. And so it can be transformed essentially through metta. So we practice that every day or every other day in our meditation. So it can manifest itself not as anger, but as an act of generosity. Yeah, so in the precepts, as an act of generosity, we can respond generously. We can respond with compassion when we see it arising. And particularly when I think of those sort of world events which are really, they're arising because of conditions. And however hard that is, they're arising because of conditions, and to see the truth and the reality of that. And I think the response then of responding with truthful speech, so kind of reflecting sort of through the precepts of how we respond to each one. So we're responding to, that condition of anger. How do we respond with truthful speech? Really connecting with what we see as higher and what we see as good. So that's how, essentially, I've kind of sort of seen how we can sort of bring those teachers, those difficult teachers I have of Boris Johnson, into existence and respond essentially with love, however difficult that might be. But essentially, that's the sort of working ground I face. Just to conclude, then sort of final reflection on ksanti and sort of patient forbearance is a practice of, forbearance. It doesn't sound very exciting, but actually it's just sitting with the sort of discomfort of that and just really reflecting on those teachings which Shantideva has given us. But I think it's also important, and I think last week we touched on the sort of paramatars and the sort of couplets of the paramatars, the pairs of the paramatars, and to see it alongside virya, the energy, the sort of transforming energy in which we can take that and actually manifest it into something better, into something higher. So that's where I'm going to finish, on those sort of couplets of Shanti, on patient forbearance, and with virya, the energy which we can use to transform that. Thank you.
Am I on? Can you hear me? People hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, good. I'm just going to move the lectern a little bit, actually.
Yeah, just drag it.
Sorry. Okay. Just because I've got loads of bits of paper and I don't want them to fall everywhere. Right. So, hello. It's been a while since I've stood up here to give a talk, so I'm very delighted to be here, and delighted to be asked about the Bodhicaryavatara, because for many years it was a really very, very important text for me. And like Peter, I have chosen exactly the same verse, which, how did that happen? But I think there's something in actually some of the verses that just do shine out and do speak to us, and that's why we do choose them. So, I've also got a couple more as well to add in, so hopefully it won't be too long. So, last week Satyadoti introduced us to Kshanti, and I really want to describe how my practice of Kshanti has been transformative in my life, and has actually helped to save, I don't think this is too strong, to save my relationship with my daughter and her dad. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the one that Peter's just said. So repetition is no problem, I think, in the spiritual life, so just go for it. So ill will and resentment destroy all the benefits of spiritual practice. Ill will is the most destructive state, and Kshanti is the best ascetic practice. So we should develop Kshanti with all the effort we can muster. All the effort we can muster. So I'll just leave that there for a minute. So I suppose I should go back to say how I was throughout my life before I came to Buddhism. And what I would say is Kshanti, patience and forbearance, was not something that came naturally to me. And as a young woman, I would say not something that I particularly even admired as a virtue. Personally, I thought patience was really overrated. I'd rather go out and grab the world rather than waiting for it to come to me. So I didn't identify with patience or forbearance. I didn't feel that it was even something I needed to cultivate. I think I also had quite a strong wrong view in that being passionate or losing one's temper was a sign of a real engagement maybe in a relationship, and even perhaps showing someone that you cared. So I don't think that's necessarily a strange view or an unusual view. I do think it's a strange view, but I don't think it's unusual. So I'm going to talk about a period of my life between about 2011 and 2016, 17. And it was a time when I experienced great suffering, and my conditions were really quite extreme. And it was only by coming here, going for refuge to the Three Jewels and my practice of the Dharma that kept me going, really. So many of you know that I'm a doctor, and I work in the contraception and sexual health service in Sheffield, and I've got one daughter, Ruby, who's now 19. And her dad, Jonathan, is now very ill and in a nursing home with a condition called Huntington's disease. So I'm going to describe the time when Ruby was a young teenager and Jonathan was entering a crucial phase of his illness where he went from coping reasonably well to not coping at all, and becoming much more dependent on others. And unfortunately, for all of us, and particularly for my daughter, that time coexisted with Ruby's adolescence, her early adolescence. And I would say that's not unusual in families with Huntington's. So I should also say that I talked to my daughter about this talk because I really felt it was important that I had her permission to talk about it because it's quite personal to her. I mean, it's all about my stuff, but it involves her as well. So she was like, yeah, it's fine, Mum. Do what you need to do. So that's good. I'll just give you a bit of details about Huntington's. So Huntington's is a neurodegenerative disorder. It's genetically inherited, and it usually develops in middle age, and it's characterised by a movement disorder. So people get these sort of flailing arms and legs and find it difficult to walk steadily or do anything steadily. And people with Huntington's can be mistaken for being drunk. They also commonly get a lot of mental health problems, ranging from depression and apathy through to delusional beliefs and paranoia, and a lack of insight about the condition. And lastly, they end up getting an early form of dementia. So it's a whole body condition that comes on very insidiously, and it's really impossible to say when it starts, and I couldn't really pinpoint it in the many years that I've known Jonathan, Ruby's dad. So going back to 2011, that was the year that Ruby started secondary school. I was at the time very distracted, working too hard. Jonathan, we were separated. She spent half the time with him, half the time with me. He did a lot of the childcare, picking her up from school, all that kind of stuff. As she was growing up, I did a lot of the working. And yeah, I was working too hard. I'd taken on another job where I was working on call at night as well. And unbeknown to me, her dad was slowly losing it. And our set of family conditions that had been quite stable was starting to unravel. So the first thing I noticed was Ruby became a teenager. And she started to become a lot more argumentative. And it seemed like she was furious with me the whole time, absolutely furious. And I didn't really understand why. And she also started to hang out with kids that were a lot older than her at school, and so kids that were troubled themselves, so some kids that she felt an affinity towards. But they were hanging out in pubs, drinking too much, smoking weed, going to late night parties, all the stuff that's kind of fine when you're 16, 17, 18. She was 12, 13, 14, so pretty problematic for me, very worrying. And unfortunately, I dealt with it really badly. So I reacted with a mixture of total horrified anxiety and anger. And instead of being calm and understanding, I just became very angry with her and would regularly lose my temper. In the context of not getting enough sleep, working too hard, etc. So in return, so we just entered this pretty dreadful cycle of arguing. Yeah. So kind of normal teenage stuff, but escalated somehow. So what I didn't know was that at her dad's house, she was increasingly taking on more and more the caring role for her dad, having to get her own tea, helping with the shopping. I mean, just negotiating life's complexities. For example, he couldn't work out how to use the timer on the boiler. So they were often freezing in the morning in the winter because they couldn't work out how to get the timer on. All of this I should have been helping with, but as he was getting iller, he was becoming more, he was developing more animosity and paranoia about me. So he wouldn't let me help, and he was also really keen there was a sort of bit of a folie à deux with her and her dad in that she wouldn't let me know what was going on. So she was very loyal to her dad. So meanwhile, she was hating school, feeling really disconnected from peers and struggling to go to school. And eventually, when she was 14, she just stopped going. And there was no way I could get her to go. So on top of that, Jonathan's response was to blame me for her not going to school. He had developed this sort of paranoid, delusional belief that somebody was going to take her away from him, that social services were going to intervene, and he was totally paranoid that he was going to get blamed for what was going wrong. And so he started a campaign to tell everybody else what a bad mother I was. So he started writing terrible hate letters about me. So to school, to social services, to my GP, to the Buddhist Centre actually. So you can imagine how distressing that was. I was already quite angry, so I became more angry. So it was almost like he was pouring petrol on the flames of my anger, Pretty strong stuff. Anyway, fortunately, I was coming here, I had the 3 jewels in my life, and I was able to turn to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. And I'm just going to talk about my practice over that time, and there's several strands that I'm going to bring in. Okay. Thought I might run over, I'm going to try and pull it together. So all these strands were happening at the same time, but I'm going to talk about them as if they happened sequentially. They didn't, they were all happening at the same time. So I spent many hours in front of my shrine talking to the Buddha and asking, particularly Amitabha, for help. I thought deeply about the Dharma, and I benefited enormously from my Mitra study and my GFR group, and the help of my friends, many of whom were in the room. The first thing I really had to do was take responsibility. It comes back to that first verse. Ill will is very destructive. It doesn't matter how many good things you do, it is ill will that you will be remembered by. And I really had to take that in. There is no wriggle room, as Peter said, no wriggle room, especially when you're dealing with your loved ones. And the relationship is very precious to you. I also reflected a lot on the law of conditioned co-production. I reflected on my conditions and how lots of things I contributed to the painful situation, and lots of things I didn't contribute to. They just were, and I had to deal with it. So looking at my external conditions, I gave up my second job and I reduced my hours in my first job. And this meant that, one thing it meant I was going to struggle financially, so I had to sell my house and move into a smaller house so that I could manage financially. But it also meant, eventually, that I had more time, and I had more time to help Ruby, and I had more time to reflect for myself. So that was really an important thing to do. And all these things eventually helped to reduce my stress, so I was working less. So then this was happening at the same time, I was inquiring really my state of mind. I was really looking into my state of mind and what was happening, and what was happening when I got angry, and how I could try to stop that chain reaction of getting angry, because it felt like there was absolutely no gap between me being triggered and me going off the deep end, no gap at all. So it was almost like I was trying to put my hands into the wheel of life that was spinning furiously fast. I was trying to extend that gap, so that I could have another possibility, another way of being, rather than just reacting. I read a lot about neuroscience at the time, and that helped me to understand what was happening to me. And I drew on anger management therapy to help myself through. And this is where the second verse that helped me a lot came in. Bodhicaryavatara talked about it in his talk a few weeks ago, and that is, to start with, we should develop a non-reactive state of mind by acting as if we had no senses at all, just like a block of wood. I don't know if you were here and you saw his block of wood. I was laughing my head off at that because I was just thought, that is just brilliant, because that's exactly what I did for many years. I just acted like a block of wood. But how do we actually do this? You know, it's all very well saying, oh, act like a block of wood, but if you're in the grips of kind of being angry a lot, it's very difficult to break that cycle, break that habit. So, so some things that helped, that old sort of useful adage, count to 10 or 20 or 100, you know, however many times you need to count to, really helped. Drinking a glass of water is really useful, because I don't know about you, but a lot of arguments happen in the kitchen. So you can walk to the sink and pour yourself a glass of water and drink. And while you're drinking, you can't talk, and you can't speak, and you can't say all those awful things that are going on in your head, like you're so selfish, you're so such and such, whatever it was. The other thing that I did a lot was walk out of the house, walk to the top of the garden and just sit. And our house is now at the top of Crooks, and I've got the Don Valley on one side, the Rivlin on the other, and I could just sit. And that was very soothing, actually, just to hear the city below me. So yeah. So I was trying to stretch that gap open. I also reflected a great deal on how Jonathan couldn't help his situation, although he was inflaming things, making things much worse, and his actions were causing me a great deal of suffering. I could understand why he was acting that way. He was terrified that he was going to lose his daughter, and that's why he was acting that way. It was a mad way to act, but that's why. So I spent a lot of time reflecting on that and putting him in the fourth stage of my metta bhavana. Lots of other things helped. Looking after myself, basically, talking it through, having a GFR group with other mothers, talking through our difficulties in parenting, getting exercise, eating well, meditating, everything. Yeah. To sum it all up, conditions change. I put a lot of energy into changing my conditions, and in 2016 that started to bear fruit. So Ruby, despite not going to school, got some GCSEs, which meant she could go back to college, and she gained confidence in that, and she was suddenly a lot happier. She gained a peer group and was happier. Around the same time, Jonathan was given some antipsychotic medication, and that helped him a great deal, and his animosity towards me dissolved. And that meant that I could start to help him. And that took the pressure off Ruby. So suddenly we were in a totally different landscape. Having said that, I don't think, unless I'd done all that preparatory work, I would have been able to help him. So unless I'd developed a lot of metta towards him, I wouldn't have been able to do that. And his sister and brother still don't talk to him to this day, even though he's now in a nursing home, because he was so difficult for very many years. So, yeah, and that's very common in Huntington's. Yeah. So anyway, that's my story about my crucial situation. I think I've gone on too long, so I should wind it up. Thank you.
Can you hear me? I feel very moved, so I feel a bit like, oh, I don't want to speak really. Well, here I am. So, I'm from Mexico originally, and when I started going to the Buddhist Centre, not long after I started going to the Buddhist Centre, I heard this amazing story, which I'm going to tell you. Before I tell you it, I want to tell you a definition of what a myth is. It's a story that holds values. These values cannot be communicated merely through rational explanation. Yeah, so a myth is a story that holds values, and those values can't be explained or communicated merely with rational explanation. So I'm going to tell you a little story, and just it's a myth. So it's the myth. Some of you will know it. It's the myth of the 1,000-armed, 11-head Avalokitesvara. So Avalokitesvara is a mythical archetypal figure that looks down on the world with compassion. Before he had 1,000 arms, he had 2 arms and 2 legs, and 1 head, and just looked like all of us here. And he saw the suffering of the world. He saw the suffering of the world. He kind of surveyed the world, and he saw that people were suffering in many different kinds of ways. So he made a very strong resolution. He took a vow to save all sentient beings from their suffering. And he added, if I ever think of saving just myself, may my body shattered into 1,000 pieces. So off he went, and he tried to save all sentient beings from suffering. And he really tried sincerely and honestly. And then he had a look at the world again after some time. And he sort of thought, yeah, I've helped some people, but the world actually is still very much suffering. So he tried again. And probably he tried again and again and again. And he's still like, yeah, he's sort of helped a few people, but the world is still kind of in great suffering. There's great masses of suffering. And the thought came into his mind. Maybe what's the point? I'm sort of making all this effort, really exerting myself, really trying to help everybody, and look at these foolish people, they just kind of, I'm not sure he thought about that one, that's right, they just make themselves suffer, something like that. So he thought, maybe what's the point? I just kind of go into a state of great bliss myself, and I can just be happy myself. Boom! Remember his vow? He exploded into 1,000 pieces. So in great agony, all these pieces scattered on the floor. He called on his teacher, Amitabha, which represents great love and great compassion. So he's the Buddha of great love and great compassion, red, ruby red, beautiful Buddha. Sincerely called for his master, please help me, please help me. The Buddha Amitabha, seeing the sincerity of Avalokitesvara's wishes, he put him together into this beautiful form with 1,000 arms, 1 eye on each hand, so that he could see clearly each situation, each individual situation, each individual. 11 heads to be able to see in all directions. They probably got quite high, wouldn't they? If you have 11 heads. And all sorts of implements with each hand. So that's the myth. So he was much better able to then have 1,000 arms rather than 2. So that's the myth. And the verse from the Bodhicaryavatara that I love, which is related to this myth, goes like this. May I be the doctor and the nurse for all beings until the world is cured. May I be food for the hungry and wealth for the poor. May I be a protector for the unprotected, a guide for the lost, a boat to the other shore. May I be a lamp for those who need light, a bed for those who need rest. May I be a servant to all beings. And I just find that a very beautiful aspiration. And I think, so I was 17, and I was really, when I had that myth, and the myth of Avalokitesvara, and it just really resonated with me very, very deeply, and I just felt like that I want to dedicate my life to sort of live by that myth, and sort of trying to find ways to be as helpful as I can and be a servant. There's this sort of myth of being a servant and finding ways to love as much as I can everyone in each situation. So my life, from the time I encountered Buddhism, is being about trying to work out what that means. Because while my heart just really comes out when I hear those sort of words, those sort of aspirations, like, oh yeah, of course, that's how I want to live. And at the same time, I have loads of limitations, and I get angry, or I'm kind of, I'm short with people, or I can, I'm not always, my activities are not always beneficial all the time. So it's like, okay, that's that tension there. But yeah, so I feel like Dharma life, my life trying to practice Buddhism, is being about trying to live more and more by the values that are pictured, dramatized by this myth of Avalokitesvara. So there's a couple of things I wanted to mention there. One is that it's being a lot more and more. So when I encountered Buddhism, it was a little bit like, yes, here is something I can really put my energies into and I really throw myself into. And it was a big sense of like, yeah, this is a big sense of me, kind of me doing it, me saving all beings, me being the savior, this sort of Jesus kind of figure. And I had long hair and all that. And gradually, that view again and again gets challenged. So it's being a gradual kind of peeling off of actually, it goes back to the myth, like Avalokitesvara tried himself to kind of save all sentient beings as a limited individual. And again and again he came against the kind of like, actually he can't save the world. And that's me, like actually, there's no way I could be the doctor and the nurse for all living beings. There's no way that I can love all sentient beings in the same way I love my daughter, or in the same. I can't nourish all sentient beings like that. I can't kind of provide for everyone. I'm just a person with very limited energy, resources, and my view of the world is very, very kind of limited. So more and more with the practice of meditation and study and friendship and everything that we do, slowly there's that kind of gradual surrender. It's more of a surrendering to like, okay, I am putting myself into the service of something bigger, into the service of being part of a community. So Sangharakshita talks about the 1,000-armed Avalokitesvara as a symbol for a spiritual community. So he says there's no way we can't individually, we can't really save the world, we can't kind of help all sentient beings. But as a community, we have a lot more tools. We have each one of us has a talent or a skill, a way of seeing others, a way of seeing the world. That kind of it's a different way into helping one another. So together we grow. That's something I sort of more and more learn. The more I surrender into being of service in our community, the more I grow. The more I kind of grow out of this limited sense of like it's all about me and sort of me helping beings to is us helping each other and trying to help the world. So peeling off this view that is about me and surrendering into community. That's the kind of more and more what's happening, what kind of keeps happening. Like, okay, and every time I strive to make it about me, I bump into a wall and shattered into 1,000 pieces. and I have to kind of call something big. I have to call Amitabha, or I have to call Avalokitesvara and say, help me. And then I'm reminded, actually, you just be of service, and then it will be okay. Be of service to the community, and then it will be okay. Yeah, so I told you the myth of Avalokitesvara. A myth is a story that holds values, and these values cannot be just explained rationally. So I want to leave you with that image of the 1,000-armed Avalokitesvara and the verse. If I can find it. So the verse kind of communicates that myth as well, that impossible myth, and is inherently going to be a tension. Inherently, is going to be a tension between the ideal that we're trying to live up to and our everyday reality. And I think that's a really healthy kind of tension. And I think that's what myth does, and stories, and what the Bodhicaryavatara does again and again. I think it kind of holds us in tension, and if we can stay with that tension, then we can hopefully shatter into 1,000 pieces and then be receptive to something bigger, so that we can be part of something much bigger. Sorry, I lost my verse. May I be the doctor and the nurse for all beings until the world is cured. May I be food for the hungry and wealth for the poor. May I be a protector for the unprotected, a guide for the lost, a boat to the other shore. May I be a lamp for those who need light, a bed for those who need rest. May I be a servant to all beings.